Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and we have the viewership figures for last night's episode of the Doctor Who 60th anniversary special, Wild Blue Yonder. And the viewership has gone down from the Starbeast. This is what I predicted. I figured that the first one would start out good, it would go down quite a bit, and then shoot back up for the Neil Patrick Harris. Now, most of those predictions are all over the place because the Starbeast didn't actually start out good, but at least that trajectory that I predicted seems to be on place where it goes down and then comes back up is still my prediction for the giggle next week. As much as I really liked Wild Blue Yonder in comparison to what we've gotten in the last few years, again, it's mediocre at best when compared to a lot of the predecessors in the Tennant Smith and even the Capaldi eras. It was a massive improvement from the Starbeast and from the Chibnall era. Even with all that said, this is something that I'm happy about because it further degrades the idea that Doctor Who is better than ever. This lie that people have been perpetuating on Twitter that this is amazing, these viewership figures are incredible. Then why did they go down? Why did the viewership for the 60th anniversaries decrease rather than increase? If it was overwhelmingly positive, like so many people claimed, these viewership figures would not have gone down. Now, we're still waiting for the consolidated numbers for the Starbeast, which in today's climate is more important because of on-demand streaming and stuff like that you can do on the BBC iPlayer in the days following the release of the episode. Those are important figures to take into account, but the overnight figures still have immense value when compared to the recent entries and even the predecessors in previous decades. People who were criticizing me for comparing the Starbeast figures to 1963 don't seem to realize that there were significantly less people in the UK in 1963. So the fact that it didn't even get over those numbers when no one knew what the show was, Doctor Who came out of nowhere. Of course, it wasn't a pre-established franchise with the fan base already established. So yes, it is warranted to compare these numbers from the Starbeast and from Wild Blue Yonder to all of the predecessors in the franchise. It barely beats out most of the Jodie Whittaker run, some of the Capaldi run, but doesn't even come close to anything before that. And this most recent episode, Wild Blue Yonder, dips to even Whittaker numbers. How can people defend these viewership figures? How can people claim that these are good viewership figures when it's dipping down that low? The viewership figures for last night's Wild Blue Yonder overnight is at 4.83 million views. Now, that is less than last week's The Starbeast. Yeah, it's not significantly less, but if it was overwhelmingly positive reception, as so many people on Twitter seem to claim, that number would have increased or at least stayed consistent. I don't know what the Giggle's going to do, but I imagine the Giggle will do better than that 5 million, even with all the negativity surrounding the response to The Starbeast, because Neil Patrick Harris, because it's the final entry in the 3-part 60th anniversary. Final entries usually see the biggest impact when it comes to viewership, and we're coming close to Jodie Whittaker numbers here with 4.83 million. In Jodie Whittaker's final season in the Flux, she had her high was 4.43, so that's not that far off. That's 0.4 million difference when it comes to her highest of series 13 and the lowest of the 60th anniversary specials. That's not a lot. That's not even 500,000 people difference in UK. That is incredibly embarrassing for Russell T Davies, the BBC, Disney, and Sony, and everyone else who's been involved with this production. We're barely getting better than Jodie Whittaker numbers, which for the most part, we're down to series low. Some of these numbers, like this 2.20, is the lowest that Doctor Who has seen in its lifetime, even as low as when the show was canceled back in the 80s. This is embarrassing for Doctor Who. Going back a little bit farther to Series 12, we've got these viewership figures. And again, I'm just comparing overnight to overnight. I'm not comparing the overnights of Wild Blue Yonder or Starbeast to the consolidated of any predecessors. This is just overnight compared to overnight. When the consolidated numbers come out, I'll compare consolidated to consolidated. But this, when we come to Series 12, is right about where Wild Blue Yonder is. The first episode, Spyfall Part 1 of Series 12, had 4.88 million views, which is higher than this special. Spyfall Part 1 got higher views than Wild Blue Yonder, and then of course it dipped substantially throughout the season, coming back up a little bit during the special, of course. This is embarrassing. And of course, with Series 11, you have that high viewership figure that we know from the first episode of Jodie Whittaker, that 8.2 million overnight viewership, just because of the curiosity about a female doctor. But all of these figures, all of Jodie Whittaker's first season figures beat out the Wild Blue Yonder special soundly and beat out the Starbeast soundly. How are people defending this? Oh, TV landscape's different. this is only a couple of years ago. This isn't me comparing the numbers to Voyage of the Damned, one of the highest viewed episodes in Doctor Who history. I'm not comparing it to that back in 2007, I believe is when that special came out. I'm comparing it to the last 5 years, when streaming was still available, when a lot of these same factors, the TV landscape was very similar at this time, and yet Doctor Who, The Wild Blue Yonder, Doctor Who, The Starbees cannot even compete with Series 11. Can't even compete with Series 11. And then, of course, as always, I'd like to mention the Rotten Tomatoes score. It is abysmal. This is lower than I expected. I figured a lot of nostalgia for David Tennant would increase this score quite a lot, but that doesn't seem to be the case. People are rejecting this nonsense. Russell T Davies isn't the man that we used to know. He isn't the man who resurrected the show in 2005. He can be, as I believe Wild Blue Yonder proves. It was, for the most part, a really decent episode. Yes, there were a lot of issues, especially the first 10-15 minutes of it. Complete nonsense, terrible exposition, a pointless opening, cold open, and then, of course, the references to the Timeless Children and the Flux did not need to be included, and further cemented that this changes nothing. A decent episode changes nothing because the Timeless Children is still canon, and I fully believe that this will be the exception to the rule of the Russell T Davies. I believe Starbeast will be the norm going forward in the Russell T Davies era, but we'll only have to wait and see, and hopefully the viewership figures stay up just enough so that we can actually see how Russell T Davies will fare, because they're dipping so low that perhaps by the Series 14 release, or Series 1 as it seemed to be rebranded as, perhaps during that run, we'll get down to the low Jodie Whittaker numbers and this show might be canceled, which would be quite impressive to see the failure that is the Chibnall and RTD2 eras. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Anon.